Hey guys, Michael Hyatt here. If you're watching this recorded broadcast, thanks so much for joining. You can tap on the screen and still leave hearts even though you can't comment if you're on the replay. My name is Michael Hyatt, and my goal is to be able to give you the clarity, the confidence, and the tools you need to win at work and to succeed at life. I'm the author of the New York Times bestseller platform, Get Noticed in a Noisy World. I also run a company called Intentional Leadership, where we provide online training for people that are overwhelmed achievers. That's really our target market, and that's probably you, otherwise you wouldn't be listening to this broadcast. I also have a blog at michaelhyatt.com, and I have a podcast, brand new episode up today, which you can find in iTunes. It's called This Is Your Life, and we're going to be talking about today's episode on this particular scope. Now, this is going to last about 30 minutes. I'm going to be talking about how to give yourself an unfair advantage when it comes to leadership, okay? And I'm going to get into the content here in just a second. And by the way, if you hear some noise in the background, I've got construction going on at the house today, and they just conveniently decided to start again after lunch right now. So they're tearing up some concrete and some other stuff as well. But great to have you guys on board. Where are you from? You can just tell me in the comments. Hi from Boston, Clay from Laurel. Hey again, Clay. Annapolis, Granville, Ohio. Very hot, humid Winnipeg. What? In Canada? That can't be true. Austin, Dubai, Dallas, Beijing, Oregon, Bangor, Utah, Virginia. I'm going to turn my text messages off. Cincinnati, Australia. Ed from Detroit, Georgia. Hello from Austin. Hello to you. Hey, Laura Clark. Good to see you. Aaron from Georgia, Atlanta. Awesome. Again, my name is Michael Hyatt. I'm the author of the New York Times bestseller platform, Get Noticed in a Noisy World. And I'm also a blogger at michaelhyatt.com, where I get about 1 million page views a month, and I write on issues related to leadership if you don't know me. And today, I'm going to be talking about how to give yourself an unfair advantage when it comes to leadership. If you would like that, give me a yes in the comments. And by the way, if you're not able to comment, it says broadcast too full. Sometimes you can X out of the broadcast and come right back in. And if you keep doing that, sometimes people get off and leave room for you. Yes, 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 yes. Everybody's saying yes. Anybody not interested in an unfair advantage? You can put no in there. That's fine. Okay, so let me tell you what it is. I'm going to jump right into the content. This scope is going to last 30 minutes. So for about 15 minutes, I'm going to give you straight content, and then I'm going to take your questions. And I'd be so grateful, before we begin, if you'd share this scope with your network. All you have to do is swipe left to right on an iOS device, or bottom to top if you're on an Android. Click the share button and share this with your followers. And again, if you're hearing construction noise, by the way, are you hearing construction noise in the background? Like a concrete saw? Because that's exactly what's going off. Hey from Branson. Nope, nobody's hearing it? Great. Yes, no noise. So some are, some aren't. Okay. All right, so what I talked about in today's podcast, and let me just kind of give you the outline of what I'm going to cover or what I do cover in the podcast. I think this is such an important topic, and it may sound familiar, and you may think that you've already got this mastered, but I'm going to tell you, this is the single thing that caused me to leapfrog my peers, and I think made a place of bigger responsibility for me in the corporate world. It's enabled me to create all kinds of content, to connect with people, to be able to influence them, and it's one word: reading. If you want to lead, you have got to decide that you're going to be a reader. And not just blog posts, although I have nothing against that. I'm a blogger. And by the way, you can find today's podcast, I'm a podcaster as well, at vmentor.tv/reading. That's today's podcast, which just went up this morning. Now, let me just tell you a few things that I cover in this podcast. I talk about why a forgotten art will really make you to stand out in business, and that's reading, obviously. When you read, you become a wealth of knowledge, a resource to other people. You've got something to share. You're able to synthesize information that you're receiving from a lot of different sources. You'll be able to take what you know from your reading experiences and augment that and make a greater contribution. I also talk about the main difference between TV and books, and I'm looking at my notes here, in building your critical thinking skills. There is nothing, and I go into this in depth on the podcast, but there's nothing like long-form reading, books, to develop your critical thinking skills and put you ahead of your peers who are going home at night and vegging out in front of the TV. Okay? If you believe that, tap on the screen and give me some hearts. Do you love books? How many of you wished you had more time to write books? Tony says he agrees. Awesome. Okay, another thing I talk about, how novels, memoirs, and autobiography can improve your ability to understand and connect with people. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. Sometimes people, particularly people that follow me, just read business books. I want to tell you something. That's a mistake. I love business books. It's my favorite genre. I read business books like crazy, and I'll tell you about a few of them here in a moment that I'm reading. But novels, history, memoirs expand your creative ability and give you much more of a repertoire when it comes to business conversations. You're able to pull in things that maybe you don't think immediately could be associated with that, but absolutely do. Another thing I talk about in the podcast, how reading gives us a competitive edge as we get older, why it's important for your brain. If you want to stay brain healthy, reading is a key way to do that, to ward off Alzheimer's, dementia, and other diseases of the brain. On the podcast, I also talk about one easy method for leading a book discussion group. And then I talk about 4 tips for maximizing your reading time. How many of you would like to read more if you could? Give me a yes. You'd like to read more if you could. Yes, Darren says leaders are readers. Absolutely. I learned that from John Maxwell. Somebody said I love helping people. Yes, yes. Casey Cup says yes. So many yeses going by, flying so quickly. Britt says yes. No Boxes says yes. Angel says see. Ambassador Moore says, oh yes. Aaron says yes. Absolutely. Well, I'm going to give you the 4 tips that I develop in more depth on this particular podcast episode, which is on iTunes today. Just go to iTunes, search for my name, Michael Hyatt, H-Y-A-T-T. And if you're just joining us, I'm the author of the New York Times bestseller platform, Get Noticed in a Noisy World, and I also blog at michaelhyatt.com. So let me just give you 4 tips for reading more and enjoying it more. Okay, number 1 tip. Then I want to hear from you what some of your tips are. Number 1, put it on your calendar. This has been huge for me. My perspective is what gets calendared or what gets scheduled is what gets done. This is the difference between an intention that just kind of floats off in the ether and nothing ever really happens. That's the difference between an intention and something tangible that you make happen. Get it on your calendar. So for me, for example, right now, Saturday mornings are devoted to recreational reading, and I schedule it. Now I'm in a unique season in life. You know, I don't have small children. I don't have a lot of family activities, at least on Saturday morning. I do during the rest of the day and on Sunday, but not on Saturday morning. So I schedule time to read recreational readings, whether it's history or novels or memoirs. I don't read business books on the weekend because I want to give my brain a rest from business. Okay, so I also schedule it during the week. So typically I read every single morning, Monday through Friday. And I'm going to tell you how I do that, which leads me to tip number 2. You guys ready for this? This has been the biggest boon to me reading consistently and being able to absorb about a book a week. And it's this. Take advantage of audiobooks. Oh my gosh. You can redeem the time that you spend in the car. Zig Ziglar used to call the car the rolling university, because inside of your car you can listen to books and soak up a wealth of knowledge that can dramatically improve and increase your leadership. But the time I mostly listen to books, because I'm usually going to the gym with Gail first thing in the morning, so I don't really have a commute of any sort, but where I listen to books now is when I'm at the gym working out. I almost always, unless I'm working with my trainer and he's talking to me, but when I'm working out on my own, when I'm doing my cardio, I'm listening to books, and I'm listening to them at about 1.5 times speed. So I can absorb more by listening to the content faster, okay? And so it's a great way to learn. And if you do Amazon, which owns audible.com, where I get all my audio books from, they have this thing called Whisper Sync, where it can actually sync, get this, the audio with the text. So recently I read a novel, and I was listening to it in the car as I was running errands on the weekend, And then I would come right back, sync up with my Kindle. I mean, literally by pressing one button that says sync to furthest page read. And I would be right where I left off with the audiobook. It's really amazing. So that's my second tip. Number one, put it on your calendar. Number two, take advantage of audiobooks. Tip number three, diversify your reading. It's a mistake, as I said before, to get stuck on just reading business books or reading just novels. Diversify your reading. But listen, only if you want to be a more interesting person, okay? But it's amazing when you know some history, when you know some biographies or memoirs or natural science or natural history. It's amazing how that can make you more interesting. So diversify your reading intentionally. You'll be surprised, I'll bet, how much you really enjoy it. Every time I read a novel, and I used to never read novels, but every time I read a novel, I think, I've got to read more novels because I'm learning so much about life and I'm learning so much about myself when I get caught up in a story. Fourth tip. This is a huge one. Create a reading group. Okay, Gail and I have done this through the years, my wife Gail, where we've invited some other couples into a reading group. And typically the way it's worked, we're actually not in a group right now, but we want to start one. But here's how it works. Whoever's going to host the dinner the next month gets to pick the book. Now, just by nature of the fact that you've got other people involved, you're going to diversify your reading because they're going to pick books that you wouldn't pick for yourself. And then when we get together, we discuss it. And here's the rule for discussing it. When we get together over a meal to discuss the book, and everybody's agreed together that they're going to read the book before they show up, we're going to discuss it at the table, but we practice the rule of one conversation. And yes, somebody said, what about a mastermind group? Absolutely. This is going to be a component of my inner circle mentoring group next year, where we're going to read a book before we get together for each meeting. But we have one conversation. And what I try to do is prepare in advance with the questions that I want to use in leading the group through the content. Now, the cool thing is, if you practice this one conversation rule, if you've got interesting people, and if it's been a good book, you know what happens? You don't need a lot of questions. Honestly, 3 or 4 questions for a 2-hour meeting, plenty. And if you follow the natural conversation, but it becomes an incredibly rewarding experience where you have this shared experience where you learn a lot about the people based on their comments about the book. Okay? So those are the 4 tips for you. Let me just repeat them again, summarize. Number 1, put it on your calendar. Number 2, take advantage of audiobooks. Number 3, diversify your reading. And number 4, create or start a reading group. Now, do you have any questions? And what I'd like to ask you to do is, if you have a question, give me 2 question marks, your name in all caps, and then your questions. I would love to entertain your questions. So somebody says, just had my 2 kids listen to this. Awesome. To the scope? Fantastic. Angel says, can I be in your group? Well, probably not, but thanks for asking. Susanna says, that's an awesome read. I read while I deliver milk. Well, Clay, I'm not sure how that works, but if you can redeem the time doing that, awesome. S Fundraising, yes, sir. Paul, what are you reading right now? Well, I just am starting a brand new book by Kathy Kolbe, who invented the Kolbe test, which measures something called conation, but we use it in our company when we're hiring new employees. And she's got a brand new book out called Striving Zones. And it's basically, again, Striving Zones. Kathy Kolbe with a K, Kolbe. And it's about how people initiate work and why you have a diversity of Kolbe scores, or people that initiate work in different ways if you want to have a healthy company. Okay? So that's the nonfiction book I'm reading. Jessica, favorite memoir? I'd have to say my friend Donald Miller's book, A Million Miles in 1,000 Years. A Million Miles in 1,000 Years by Donald Miller. I just was in my Inner Circle Mastermind this morning, and we were meeting for half a day. We met with Donald Miller, and he took us through his story brand concept. Amazing. Off the charts. If you want to find out more about that, you can go to storybrand.com. Storybrand.com. What other questions? Lisa, what are your top 3 on Audible? Well, listen, Audible's got just about anything you want, so I can't even think. Usually the last book I read is, whatever. My favorite book is the last one I read. That's all I want to say. Yeah, Don Miller is awesome. Let me just block some clown who obviously doesn't have a life. By the way, one of the cool things about Periscope that you may not know is I can go into catch.me, which takes the recordings, and I can delete people or ban people after the fact. So I may not get them on the broadcast, but I get them so they don't show up again, at least not easily. So anyway, what are the questions? What are you guys reading? That's what I'd like to know. What's a book that you're reading that you're really enjoying? So somebody said, did I miss your explanation of one conversation? You may have. Basically, one conversation is this. We do this, by the way, every night at dinner, and that is we only allow one conversation at the dinner table. Everybody can participate. Anybody can ask a question, but we don't have side conversations. We just have one conversation. I learned this from my friend Lucy Swindoll, and it's been huge for our family. It's really taught us to be better listeners and better question askers. Anika says, any documentaries you recommend? I can't think of any off the top of my head. Do you mean by that like histories? I would say anything by David McCullough, like 1798 is an awesome book on the American Revolution, or John Adams, or anything else he has written. Somebody said I learned this at L'Abri. I don't know if that was Madeline or somebody else, but yes, L'Abri is a place in Switzerland where people learn to read and discuss. Steve says, whoop, I lost that. I'm rereading John Acuff's book, Do Over. Fantastic. Made to Stick. Great book. I love that. Brian, how to implement the book you read? Well, typically I take notes. I take an action list, and I've done it a lot of different ways. But mostly what I'm looking for is not to be able to regurgitate the content of the books, but I'm looking for the impact on my own thinking so that I can synthesize those ideas and come up with new ideas on my own. Making of an Ordinary Saint by Nathan Foster. Thank you for sharing that. Start. Yes, great book. Another one by John Acuff. And the Power of Full Engagement. Great book. Brainmaker by Dr. Perlmutter. I have not read that, but I'd like to read that. Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. Great book, which I have not read, but it's on my list. Green Eggs and Ham. One of the all-time classic leadership books. Start Something That Matters. Another book. Another Fire Starters. Great. How do you constantly create content, Angel says? You know, it's actually related to what I'm sharing with you right now. If you want to have a consistent output, you've got to have a consistent input. Readers are oftentimes writers. The more you read, the more content you ingest, the more resources you have to work with when it comes to podcasting, blogging, writing books, and all the rest. Okay? Sell or Be Sold by Grant Cardone. Parenting Boys. Fantastic. Any other questions or any other books that you're reading? Katie, what are some of your favorite blogs to read? Well, I really do enjoy Don Miller's blog, Storyline. And I can't remember if that's storyline.com or what. I've got it in Feedly, which is how I read blogs, but Don's is one of my favorite. Pat Flynn's blog is actually good. It's Smart Passive Income. That's another one I enjoy. Yes, Madeline says Brene Brown's new book, Rising Strong. I've actually got a bit of a review coming out on that book on Friday. What's today, Wednesday? So yeah, Thursday for Friday. So I got a bit of a review of that book coming out, at least from one of the chapters that'll be out on Friday on my blog at michaelhyatt.com. Somebody said, got to read Shave 10. Thanks for mentioning that, because I'm going to put the link up right here. This book is free. You can get it at vmentor.tv. Shave 10. How to shave 10 hours off your work week. The One Thing by Gary Keller. I love that. And if you love that book, you probably love Essentialism by Greg McKeown. Somebody said, do I read multiple books at the same time? I'm afraid I do. I usually have about 6 books going at any one time. By the way, one of the things that really helped me to read more and to enjoy it more is to give myself permission to quit on a book. So have you ever read a book and you thought it started out great, the promise was great, but then it just got boring and started to drag? Well, I'm going to give you permission, like I give myself permission, to quit. You know, here's the dirty little secret that I learned in the publishing industry after being in that industry for over 30 years, most recently as the CEO of Thomas Nelson Publishers. Most books aren't worth finishing. Why? Because they have a big idea that can be covered in about 2 or 3 chapters, and the rest of it is fluff. I mean, I hate to sound so cynical. Not every book's like that. You know, obviously, the great books aren't like that. But if a book begins to be redundant or just to drag on or becomes superfluous, you know, the content becomes superfluous to the main thesis, just quit. Go on to another book. Daniel says, what was the name of the syncing app for reading? It's actually an Amazon service. If you buy the Kindle book for your Kindle, you can buy the audible.com version of the audiobook, and they have a technology called Whisper Sync. All one word, Whisper Sync. Anything about Dr. Henry Cloud. I love Dr. Henry Cloud. One of the best books. If you've not read this, you must read it. It's called Necessary Endings. Steve, is this Periscope show negatively impacting your ability to block your work? I actually think it's serving my work. I'm pretty clear about my objectives. Although this is a 30-day experiment, my team and I will evaluate this after 30 days, and I think this is like day 20, and we'll figure out if we're going to continue. Okay, so I have a question for you guys. This is a little bit about a survey, but last night, because of my schedule, yesterday was all-day mastermind with my Inner Circle Mastermind, I ended up having to do my Periscope at 7 p.m. last night. So that's Central Daylight Time here in the U.S. I know we've got a global audience, but I did it at 7 p.m. last night. Do you prefer, when I normally do it, which is 12:30 in the afternoon Central Daylight Time, today we're doing it at 2 because of my schedule, or would you prefer it in the evening, or would you prefer that I just mix it up based on my schedule? What do you prefer? Set schedule and what time, or a not set schedule? Give me some input on that, because I really do want to meet your needs. Somebody said 12:30 at noon. My idea was we'd do lunch together essentially. Yeah, and I know in the UK that's a completely different time. I'm in Atlanta, enjoy the 1:30 Eastern time. Wow, a lot of good input. I'll go back, by the way, and review all this. Even though I'm losing this, it's going by so quickly, I'll go back and review this on catch.me. Somebody says a mix-up. You know, realistically speaking, I probably will have to mix it up some, because there are just days when I'm in the middle of, you know, a coaching session or a mastermind group or doing a video that I just can't do it in the middle of the day. But I really have liked having a steady time that I do it every single day. Lunch is good. Started reading War of Art. Wow, that's A. Jones Wrights. War of Art is a fabulous book. If you haven't read it, you got to read it. It was great to learn in the evening after the day. Yeah, I kind of like doing it in the evening. Somebody last night when I was doing my scope said, this is like Michael Hyatt at prime time. And I thought, well, that's kind of a cool concept. I like that too, because there's a lot less distraction for me, because I've got to go from this to some other things I got to do today as well. I think one of the questions going to be from my team is, you know, what does this do to my energy level? You know, what I can tell you right now is that I feel energized by it. I love interacting with you guys. I get incredible encouragement and insight from you guys. So, you know, I love doing it. If you do evening, Europe will miss it, as Neil said. Yeah, thank you. Good point, Madeline and Niels, because that's going to be like very early in the morning before most people are up. Novel recommendations, all I can tell you is the last one I read. I'm in the middle of To Kill a Mockingbird right now, but the last one I completed was a book called The Martian. Language is a little rough. Great book. Great book. It's like Robinson Crusoe, but it takes place on Mars. Joan, this has motivated me. Great. I would just encourage you. Maybe we ought to do a 30-day challenge. Pick a book, read it, see what it does for you. Yeah, somebody said, Michelle says, Traveler's Gift. That's by Andy Andrews. It's a book I had a privilege of publishing. Do you know that that book was first hit the New York Times fiction list? Then they said, well, it's not really fiction. It's more like a parable. So then it ended up on the nonfiction list. Then it ended up on the advice and self-help list. So it's the only book I know of that's hit all three lists because they couldn't figure out what it is. Somebody said The Shack, maybe a similar kind of thing. Andy Andrews is terrific, one of my really good friends. Do you guys like the idea of a 30-day challenge? You know, I think it's, I like to do those kind of mind hacks from time to time where I just say for the next 30 days, I'm going to really focus on reading, you know, a book a week or maybe just one book in the next 30 days and I really try to get the very best one I can. Somebody says they're from Brazil. Greetings. Love Brazil. Is your prep for scopes inspired by a blog or other way around? Great question. It's actually inspired by the blog. So normally what I do is I take the blog post for that day, and I only blog on Monday and Friday. I podcast on Wednesday, so I have 3 new pieces of content every week. And then I discuss that on my scope. Now, what do I do on Tuesday and Thursday? Well, I do one of two things. Either I discuss one of my popular posts that I've written sometimes years ago, but the ideas are still fresh and still relevant, or I just take questions. Like last night was an open Q&A, and I love to do that. Do I film on my smartphone? Actually, you know what I'm using for Periscope today? I'm using my iPad. You know why? Because I can actually read the type because it's big enough for me to read without putting on my reading glasses. Somebody said, just discovered audiobooks, and it's a great discovery if you haven't done it. I've found people that didn't consider themselves to be readers that ended up reading a ton just because they could listen to it on Audible. Reggie in Nashville says, it's so hard for me to read for pleasure. I have to read for research. I know how that is. That was me for years, until I decided that I wasn't going to work on the weekends, that I needed that margin to recover, to tend to the other parts of my life that weren't work. Because I'm all about helping you win at work and succeed at life. It's not either or, it's both and. So I've got to nurture those parts of my life that are not work related. As it turns out, I wasn't just created for work. I was created for relationships and for recreation and all that. So I gave myself permission to read books that are other than work-related books for that very point. Yeah, somebody said, is my iPad on a tripod? Yes, it is. And then I've got a ring light behind that. Maybe what I need to do is another scope where I show you my equipment. I did that early on, but it's changed a little bit. I got some cool new gear, and I'd love to share that with you guys. So maybe we'll do that on a Tuesday or Thursday coming up. Any other questions? Dr. Engineer says, I'll try that for my 30-day challenge. Somebody said, do you buy all the books you're reading? Yeah, I do. But there's certainly value in using a public library. You know, to me, convenience is more important than anything, and I tend to be a little impulsive. So when I hear about a good book, I just buy it on Amazon, and I typically buy the Kindle. That's where I start if I'm going to buy actually the book I'm going to read. Or I go to Audible and I look first if there's an Audible edition of that so I can look at it on my workout. Andy Traub just did a scope on hardware. Awesome. A lot of people are doing that, and I learned from everybody on this. Audiobooks help to differentiate research versus pleasure reading for me. Oh, that's interesting. I could see why, I think, because when you're listening on Audible, you can't really easily underline, hard to underline that audio message. It's hard to write notes. You pretty much just have to listen for pleasure. Madeline, somebody's answering Madeline. I like the challenge. I think it will help me finish all the books I want to read. You know, I try to set a goal for the year. Like my goal for this year is to read 26 books. So that's just a book every 2 weeks. I'm on pace for that. In fact, I'm ahead of pace. And just having the goal makes sure that I get my head into the book and read it. Tony says, we talk about audiobooks a lot at my company, Logos Bible Software. Great company, by the way. Get Traveler's Gift on audio. His voices are brilliant. Yeah, Andy's incredibly entertaining. The Bible, Ambassador Moore says, that's actually my very favorite book. I start every morning there. I read through the Bible in a year, reading something called the 1-Year Bible. It's got the entire Bible divided into daily readings where you read an Old Testament reading, a New Testament reading, a Psalms, and a proverb. It's a great way to get a balanced approach and read through the entire Bible in a year. And even if you're not a person of faith, I would recommend this. You know why? Because there's no book in the history of civilization that's influenced culture and other writing and people and all kinds of stuff than the Bible. So read it through. You owe it to yourself. Do that at least once. Well, guys, I hope today is going to be a great day for you. But the difference between having a great day and not having a great day is you deciding you're going to make it a great day. So go out there and make it a great day. You've got agency, you've got the ability, you've got the power, so use it for good. And I look forward to talking to you tomorrow. By the way, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Central Daylight Time. I look forward to seeing you then.